Welcome to Moments with Marianne. You know, Memorial Day has always been a day of remembrance for me, as I know it is for so many others. I'd like to offer my sincerest thanks to all service members who have served, who are currently serving, and those that made the ultimate sacrifice. I'd also like to say thank you to their families. You know, usually they're the ones that go without mention, and yet their sacrifice is something that we all should recognize. Our veteran highlight and special guest today is Alden Mills. He's here to talk with us about his new book, Unstoppable Teams, the 4 Essential Actions of High-Performance Leadership. Now, Alden is a 3-time Navy SEAL platoon commander and was the CEO of Perfect Fitness. He's also a longtime entrepreneur with over 40 patents and has 25 years of experience working on high-performance leadership, sales, and team building. So let's welcome to the show, Alden Mills.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Marianne.
What an honor it is to have you here. My goodness. I mean, your book is absolutely amazing. I mean, once I picked it up, there was so much useful information in this. I'm sure every leader is going to want to get one of these and give it to everyone on his team.
Well, that's the hope. And most importantly, I'm so appreciative of you taking the time to read it. So many times you get the interview and they just kind of skimmed it. And I'm grateful that you really spent that time. And I'm also just been overwhelmed with the people who have found it so useful in their daily lives, whether it's running their family, a community action group, a charity group, or a business.
Well, you know, and how important is that people can see the different applications that this book can be used for? I mean, once you read it, you can completely understand that.
That's what I end up telling people all the time is they're like, well, you know, I'm not the CEO of a big company. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Do you work with humans? well, yeah, I do. I mean, I work with them in my church group or I work with them in my PTA. I'm like, well, then guess what? You're a leader and leaders build relationships. And that's what building teams are all about. It's just a collection of relationships that have come together to do something greater than their selfish desires.
And, you know, and it's interesting when you look at, I mean, the Navy SEALs, I mean, you're a platoon commander, and with the Navy SEALs, I mean, they're the toughest teams on earth. And so to be able to use those principles that you have developed and learned as, you know, being a Navy SEAL and how people can incorporate that in their own lives, I mean, how powerful is that?
It is, and I think a lot of people get a little surprised when a 3-time Navy SEAL platoon commander is talking about part of the magic that brings all these toughest people on the planet together, and that's based on care.
Well, and most of the time they think care. Are you sure?
And I'll tell them that it goes even deeper than that. That care squared is what I call love, and these teams are so loving of each other that the idea of letting a teammate down is worse than death.
Mm. Well, you know, and it's so interesting. You know, there's a portion of your book where you talk about how when groups of people are gathered together, sometimes people, you know, misidentify them as teams. And when you look at teams today, a lot of times they don't have even general respect for one another.
And that's one of the hallmarks of a difference between a group and a team. And what I'm talking about with a team is moving the human, natural, selfish desires into a selfless state where everybody is more focused on the outcome of the greater objective of the team than they are about their individual outcome, because they know they're so cared for that they don't have to worry about their backs because the team will take care of them. And that's what you're after. And God only knows that we need so many of these teams today because the problems that we are facing today require teams of people to come together and go after solving these greater human objectives that we're facing.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, you look at everything and, you know, and kind of piggyback on what you said earlier. I mean, when we look at people as far as leaders, I mean, they can be leaders of their family. And then even having these principles and using them within that context. I mean, how you look at just how impactful that is for generations.
I argue in the book, not argue, I state that the great first team that I was ever a part was my family. And one of my key team leaders was my mom, who was there at that moment when I was diagnosed with asthma, and the doctor telling me I needed to lead a less active lifestyle and learn the game of chess, which totally put me into a pity party state because I was terrible at checkers. And it was mom and dad who just consistently started to get me to believe in myself, that it was up to me to define the limit, not somebody else. And that's exactly the same thing that happens with leaders, that so many people come with all these different diverse backgrounds, and lots of different people don't have that confidence to know, like, hey, I can go above and beyond what I originally thought was possible. And when the leader can instill that amount of respect and empowerment in somebody, that they go beyond what they originally thought they could do, that becomes transformative. And that's where you start moving from groups of individuals to teams.
Well, and that's where I think your story is so powerful, because in your book, you share about, just when you're going through BUDS training and Hell Week, just, you had some difficulties in regards to asthma, and you persevered and you stayed in it regardless of what the doctors are saying.
I did. Those are some miserable times, and the perseverance that occurred there, which I talk about in the book. The first portion of the book is about how to lead yourself, because leading yourself, what ends up happening as a leader in a team, the team becomes a direct reflection of the leader. You start showing up late for work, people start showing up late for work, right? That simple reciprocity of, well, if they can do it, then I can do it too. And how you lead yourself on the internal communication, which, by the way, there's really only three things we can control: how we think, how we feel, and how we act. And those three components, the mental, the physical, and the emotional, are exactly the same drivers for everybody else that comes on board to join in some objective. And the more you can start to learn how to lead yourself internally, the better you'll be at helping others lead themselves. Because at the end of the day, this is about serving others. There's lots of talk about servant leadership. To me, that's one and the same. To lead is to serve is to care. Mm. And being able to first lead those inner conversations helps you lead everybody else's conversation to join and go beyond what they thought they could do.
Well, it's interesting because people will rise to your level of expectation, if you empower them to do that. And one of the things I appreciate about your book, you talk about how leaders, how important it is that they actually take action, because it's emulated by their team.
It's all about action, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone will think like, oh, I've worked so hard. Look at me. I'm now the executive vice president. I'm the CEO, the COO, C whatever. And all of those positions and that authority that comes with that are fleeting until they see what kind of actions you start to take once you've assumed those positions. If your actions are, it's all about me, well, what do you think is going to happen with the people that are working with you? And by the way, I stress with you versus for you. A lot of people who assume those positions will say, well, I have 1,000 people working for me. No, it's the other way around. They're working with you. They're volunteers. And if you don't treat them as such, then they'll look at other ways to find another job. I mean, what are we seeing today in the world? People are flipping from one job to the next, in months, not even in years, looking for the next best thing. Yet there are a few places where people will stay for 20, 30, 40 years. And why is that? Because they feel like they are so connected that it's more like family. And the idea of leaving that it would be like leaving a family. And that's what you're really getting after, is connecting with people emotionally, so then they can bring all their powers to bear and help the team exceed well beyond everyone else's expectation.
Yeah. I mean, when did you first realize that all of your training, all of the work that you've done had brought you to this point where all this information is relatable for leadership in the civilian world?
In the beginning, when I had gone to the Naval Academy at the ripe old age of 18, and then left SEAL Team for the first time when I was 30, and went to business school. And I thought, well, I guess I'll just take all that military training and I'll put it in a box and put it mentally in a shelf somewhere in my head. And now it's time to buckle down and be a civilian. And I very quickly discovered that, hey, the same things that we're dealing with in the military are very applicable here as a civilian. Now, it took me a little while to make that adjustment, because in the beginning I thought, gee, wouldn't it be great to take my software sales team and put them in cold water so they can understand they can stay in cold water longer than they should. One of them nearly passed out, and my VP of sales was like, what are you doing? You can't do that. You have HR departments here. And, so there was definitely some transition of years here. But over time, what really connected with me, and as I not only started a series of different businesses, but became very involved in the community with our schools. We support our public schools, and became on fundraising campaigns. And we also led a bond campaign to rebuild some of our schools. It's the same rules. And ironically, in SEAL Team, they're all volunteers. At any given day, a SEAL, even right before a mission, could walk out and say, I'm done. It's not for me anymore. And that's actually happened. Now, what you don't want to have happen is on the battlefield. That doesn't happen. But they're volunteers. And if you start to have a mindset shift that, wait a second, if I started treating my employees like they were volunteers, and that, gee, wasn't it lucky that everybody came in every day to go to work? How would you treat them differently in that case? If you just asked yourself that question, I bet you would take a different approach than you would today. Mm-hmm. Saying, well, they have to do that. They're mandatory. It's got to be this, this, and this. And of course, they need to perform and they have to hit the timelines. But if you hover over a volunteer all the time, what do you think the volunteer is going to do? I'm out of here. I don't need this. I'm here to help. That's all I'm here for. I'm not getting paid for that. So tell me what you need me to do and I'll go do it. And having a little bit more of a hands-off approach is actually that letting go enables you to empower them even more. Now, I'm not saying you just check out. There is an assessment phase where you come in and be like, hey, how are we doing? And there's also an assessment of, can you catch somebody in the act of doing something great? And what's that like, right? Everybody's constantly like, well, we're looking for the mistake. No, you're looking for something great to happen.
What a perspective shift. Because it's so true. Most leaders do look at, okay, so what's wrong now? What's happening now? As opposed to what great thing someone's accomplished.
Yeah. And now, and when somebody stumbles, which is going to happen, and by the way, I've failed way more than I've succeeded. People often will ask me, like, gee, you just have the Midas touch. I can't relate with you. I'm like, let me count the ways that I've failed. Every single thing I've ever touched, I've failed at first. And by the way, I don't really look at it as failing. I'm like, okay, I just learned a different way not to do something. And the more people start to be like, oh, okay, that person's being authentic. That person is like, oh, I'm glad to hear that, because I was really stressed about submitting this report because I wasn't sure if it was in the right format. And you're like, are you kidding me? I don't care about whatever format it's in. I care about what the end result is. And once you start having those more authentic connections, then you start building that trust, and then trust becomes the foundation from which you can really build deeper, emotionally connected relationships that empower people to go beyond what they thought they could actually achieve.
That's where the magic happens, huh?
That's part one of the magic. The second part of the magic is understanding that your team has a whole series of external teammates. I call them the 3 C's. Your customers, the contributors of the team, and the community from which the team operates in and for. And when those externals become associated and feel like they are part of that team, then you're unstoppable.
Well, and in your book, you talk about the unstoppables. And is that what you're referring to?
What I was talking about initially in the unstoppables is understanding kind of the key drivers that you might be looking for in a team. And there are these 7 traits that I outline as the unstoppables. But that's part one. And really the focus is you can teach pretty much anybody what you need to teach them. I mean, certainly you've got to hire for competence, which is one of the unstoppable traits, but drive and humility, selflessness, having them do they have perspective on where they've been and where they've gone and what kind of experiences they've had? All of those pieces add up to a culture fit, because at the end of the day, that's what you're after, is you want diversity of thought, but not diversity of heart.
Isn't that the truth? Well, and it's interesting because you come from such a unique perspective that you bring such, I believe, like wealth to the discussion of what makes a great leader, that I think a lot of businesses and a lot of leaders tend to, they just don't even have that perspective. It's not even something that they're able to achieve.
And I would say it's okay if they don't always have that perspective. For instance, when I took over my first SEAL platoon, I was by far the most junior experienced person. I had a chief who had been deployed 6 or 7 times, and I had never been deployed once. Yet, because of the formality of military structure, I outranked the enlisted chief, but he'd been there for 20 years. And I needed his perspective. I needed his experience. But the key blocker is pride, ego, and insecurity. I was secure enough with myself to know, like, okay, well, I've made it through training, and, a bunch of people have said that I'm good enough to get in this position to lead this platoon. Now I got to listen to these people because they're going to help me go to the next level. And help me they did, because if I didn't have them, I would have certainly never been able to lead that platoon. But that becomes the biggest challenge, is that you don't have to have all the experiences in the world to be the greatest leader, but you do have to be self-aware enough to be able to let go of your insecurities or your pride or your ego, so you can then allow others to shine.
Well, and that's very wise for someone that was so young to be able to have those viewpoints, because you look at it, most people don't even, they can go their whole lifetime and not develop that.
I know. And, that gets pretty frustrating, right? It's pretty hard to work with somebody that's really insecure, because usually when they're really insecure, what happens? They don't trust you. So they're going to hover over you and tell you what to do, because for some weird reason, they think that leading is telling. No, leading is teaching. It's not telling you what to do. And there's that fine line between teaching somebody what you have learned and what's worked for you versus this is how I want you to do this, well, then it just turns a person into a robot. And I don't know too many people that like to be managed. And what do we hear about all the time? Well, I'm a manager. I manage, 50 people. No, who wants to be managed? Really? I mean, does anybody grow up out of school going, oh, I can't wait to be managed when I graduate? No. Like, what wants to be managed? Inventory, time, resources, energy, money, but not people. People want to be led. They want to be loved. They want to be learned, but they don't want to be managed.
Isn't that the truth? And especially when you look at high-performing leaders. I mean, the last thing, if you're developing just a high-performance team, you've got a lot of people possibly with A-type personalities that, they kind of, they want to be led. They don't want people telling them what to do.
My biggest job was getting out of the way of my teammates. They were so good and so effective at their jobs. The best thing I could do was get out of the way and enable them and educate them with new resources and tools that they needed to go to even higher heights. And also take an interest in what it was they were trying to do for the long term, in some small way help them be a part of succeeding at those goals, whether they're professional or personal.
So what if somebody inherits a team of people who, maybe they're just, some aren't as engaged in others, and then what happens there?
Isn't that really the case though, for most of us, right? People will often say, oh, Alden, it's so easy. I mean, in relative terms, leading in the military is totally easier than leading in, or it's totally different than leading as a civilian because you can handpick all these superstars. And from one point of view, that's absolutely correct. From another point of view, actually, most of the platoons I've ever received, you inherited. It wasn't like you had this NFL draft where you could just pick anybody you wanted and be like, oh, I have all the best of the best. No, there are some great SEALs and some not so great SEALs. But then when it comes to being a middle manager, getting promoted, and by the way, you've just been promoted into the worst performing division of the company. Congratulations. Now what do you do? Right?
Yeah.
And what do you need to do first and foremost is you need to connect with them. You need to understand what's going on in their head, what's keeping them up at night. What are their pressures, their challenges, their struggles that they're dealing with when they walk out that door at night? And when they come in the next morning, what is their mind like? How many people have dealt with a single parent, somebody that's just lost a loved one, or somebody that's got an addiction? Those are all normal human struggles. And if you think you're just the moment they walk through that door, all that goes away and they're going to just focus for 8 or 9 or 10 hours a day, you're kidding yourself. And the more that you can acknowledge and say, hey, come on, let me understand this. Let me help you be a part of that. Then you can start to change the dynamic and create a culture of care. And once people start feeling cared for, they'll start to dare. But they gotta feel cared for, and it takes time. And it turns out, and this is scientifically proven by now, is that we humans have a natural reciprocity for care. Now, unless you're a psychopath with your amygdala and your brain isn't firing, you just don't get emotional response, which is a very, very small percentage of the human population. For all the rest of us out there, you go out and open a door for somebody in some apartment building, the next person will turn behind them and look to open the door for the next person, right? That basic element of reciprocity is the same thing that happens when it comes to trying to connect and build a culture of care within a team. But the rub is it's going to take time because a lot of people have been burned in the past and they'll say, what are they doing? They want something from me. Are they really being authentic? Are they just doing something to get something from me? You have to go in with an open heart and be willing to serve up a bunch of care over a period of time before people will start to reciprocate in kind and go, you know what? I really think this person cares enough about me. I'm going to see how I can help them out. That begins the magic.
Well, and you've mentioned care quite a few times. And for our listeners, excuse me, that's the leadership framework that you have listed in your book that is outlined. And we won't go into great detail in that because people really need to pick up their own copy of Unstoppable Teams because it comes together within the book. But I found it to be very profound. It's very basic in many ways for people we talked about respect as being one of them. It's kind of basic needs that people would want to have.
It is, and I'll pick on respect now you brought it up, and being, born and bred in the military, I love acronyms, but I like acronyms that are in the same alignment with what I'm trying to get across instead of some, odd thing that you have to then just doesn't really make any sense. So my acronym is CARE. Connect, achieve, respect, empower. And respect in particular is one of those special actions that if you can make that happen, will shift your dynamic from a group of individuals into a team selfless mindset. And a lot of people are like, well, yeah, I got to do respect because it's an HR thing. Like, no, you do respect so you can create an environment of contribution where everybody is not fearing to raise their hand with their great idea, which at the time they may think is a stupid idea. But that's where you're getting after that diversity of thought, not diversity of heart. Mm-hmm. I'm very passionate about it, if you can't tell.
I can tell, but, I'm glad that you are.
America needs a whole bunch of teams out here. And now more than ever, we need these care-based teams to go out there and solve all kinds of really important problems.
So who would you say that this book is written for? I know we listed a few different people when we first started our discussion here. I mean, can anyone use this within their life?
If there's anybody that's interacting with humans, they can use it. I think there's this misconception that, well, I wasn't born with a leadership gene, therefore I'm never going to be a leader. That's total hogwash. The fact of the matter is, we're all leaders. The question is, how many followers do you have? If you're a mom and a dad and you've got a family, you've got the most important leadership challenge of your lifetime. If you're in your community and working with your church, working with your charity, working with a school or some community action, which I listed many of those examples in the book, along with if you go to the military, if you're a mid-level manager, you're just starting off, you're on a sports team as a captain. It's the same principles, exactly the same principles, whether you're leading a SEAL team, leading a startup, or leading a church group.
What would you like our listeners to take away from our discussion today and from your book?
I want them to take away that we have so much innate potential in all of us, and that if they're thinking, just if there's a little whisper of a voice inside their head of like, gee, wouldn't it be cool if I did X? Then grab this book and get to work and go make that dream a reality.
I love that. Well, I have Unstoppable Teams. It's in my permanent library, and I highly suggest everyone get their own copy. Alden, where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
I'd love them to connect with me. They can find me on LinkedIn, and they can find me at my website, alden-mills.com.
Well, Alden, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It was an honor, and thank you, and God bless this great country.
Thank you, Alden. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you, and of course, to talk about your new book, Unstoppable Teams. Unstoppable Teams is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Again, if you'd like to connect with Alden and learn more about his work, you can at alden-mills.com, and we'll have the link below. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Mary Ann. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Mary Ann is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Mary Ann will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Mary Ann airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmaryann.com for more information.